Hello, Bobby Torres of Frightbox recording here with some tips on mixing rock, not metal, rock guitars. Now, in reality, obviously there's a ton of overlap between rock and metal guitars, so much so that some people may consider them the exact same type of instrument where they mix them in the same way. I almost do, but for me, because rock is generally less technical for the most part, the tones are a little drier, and just the overall arrangements might be a little different, a little more kind of like straightforward. There's a little more room for some juice added to the mix. In my case, it's a little more compression. Metal guitars, I generally tend to not compress as heavily. Rock guitars, do a little more, just for a little more character because I can, like I said, because the tones are drier. So anyway, I have an example here of a pretty rockin', straightforward rock tune by my good friends in a band called Blue Lizard. Drop D, kind of like just straight rock riffing, nice, slow, heavy rock groove. So let's check it out. We'll listen to the tone and then I'll dissect and show you exactly what processing I'm applying to the guitars in order to achieve the tone that I've achieved in this example. So let's check it out. All right, pretty solid rock tone in my opinion. It's got a slight metallic edge. We used an orange head. I don't remember the exact head, but we used an orange head through a Marshall cab. And I actually used two mics on the cab. I combined a 57 and a 421. I'm generally a single mic, just a 57 on a V30 kind of guy. But in this case, I decided to throw a 421 on the cab. And I actually combined the mics and summed them before I even went to Pro Tools. So if you look here, you'll see a DI, which is completely muted. The DIs are not being used in this mix at all. The DIs are muted. They're just there for reference and for when I had to edit. But the track L and R are both my rhythm tracks, my left and right side rhythm tracks. And they are the sum of the 57 and the 421. So that L right here, that track that says L is actually 57 and 421 combined. And then the R is the exact same thing, a 57 and 421 combined. I'm the type of person where I commit on the spot. And I highly recommend to get into that mentality because if not, you will be tweaking things until the end of time. I know because I used to go down that route. Now, I've also been criticized for not committing because I track DIs with guitars, but in my opinion, I don't really consider that not committing because I'm using the DI to edit. It's a lot clearer. You know, you can see the transient information way better. I mean, look at this. The amp track just looks like a solid bar where the DI, you can actually see transients. So to edit, it's a million times easier. Also, when I mix, I sometimes use the DI in creative ways. Not for the entire song, but for certain sections. And I highly recommend if you are sending your project off to a professional to mix, always record DIs with your guitars. Guitar tones are sometimes really challenging to capture, so that is the one exception to the rule in terms of commitment, in my opinion. Track DIs. Also spot mic cymbals, but I'll get into that later. So let's take a look at the processing that I have here. So like I said, the DIs are completely muted. They're not being used at all. This is my left channel guitar. This is my right channel guitar. There is no EQ at all on the actual channels themselves, but they are being routed to a guitar bus, which has a few different plugins on it. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna bypass all of these plugins, and let's take a listen to the actual guitar tone in its raw state and see what we're working with at the source. So let's check it out. Okay, so not bad. For me, the overall tone is pretty good. It's a little bright, and there's also a little bit of honkiness in the mid-range, at least to my ears. Like I said, most of it sounds usable, but I feel like it needs a little bit of work. So let's take a look here. The first thing that I do when I'm in this situation is I start EQing, and I actually EQ in context of the song. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna bypass the EQ that I had on there, and I'm gonna open up a brand spanking new EQ. Because I'm gonna play the track back and I'm going to start EQing, and then I'm going to explain why I EQ'd out the frequencies that I did. So let's check this out. So there you go. Right away, I could tell that I needed to roll off the low end. Mainly because I know that any of the frequencies below 70 hertz is pretty much it's not adding any musicality to my guitar sound. And anything, for rock, I roll off anything above like 8K because a lot of that sizzly you really don't need, generally because the cymbals are for the most part mixed a little louder in rock tracks. Metal, the cymbals, there's so much stuff happening that you generally have to do a lot of fader riding with the cymbals. So with metal guitars, I let a little more air exist within the guitar tracks. Again, rock, I want it to be a little tighter sounding, so I kind of roll off a lot of that Marshall. Plus, this was recorded with a Marshall, so Marshalls are known to have that like 11K fizz that I generally want out of there. I also just notched out a little bit of mid-range, kind of like the lower mids, because it was sounding a smidge honky, not crazy. Again, I'm not knocking this down 10 dB. I'm knocking it down only, 2.5 dB. And it was also a little too crisp in the upper mids. So I pulled out just about 1.5 dB around 3K. To be honest with you, I wasn't even looking at the numbers. I was just doing it completely by ear and by feel. And I always recommend to use your ears, to not get too obsessed with numbers and presets, and just always follow your gut and not overthink stuff. But anyway, so now, when it comes to rock guitars, I like to compress them a little. I don't go crazy. I don't compress them to the point where like you hear all kinds of weird pumping action happening. Just to add a little bit of character. Again, this riff is really solid and really grooving. There's not a lot of busyness happening, so I can get away with a little color. So what I had on the track originally is I had an R compressor. Classic compressor. This thing has existed forever. Just with a somewhat low ratio, a 5:1 ratio. And let's see how much compression is actually being engaged when I play back the track. Let's check this out. Okay, so as you can see, the gain reduction is in this little meter here. I was barely kissing it, maybe about 1 dB or 2, just to add a little bit of extra flavor. The other step that I took here is that instead of loading up a stereo plugin, now this is a stereo bus. Obviously my left and right guitars are both being sent to the guitar bus. But I loaded the plugin not under stereo, but under multi-mono. Now, you might be wondering what's the difference between stereo and multi-mono. When you load up for example, a compressor in multi-mono mode, the two sides are independent from one another. So let's say your right guitar, there's more gain reduction being applied to your right guitar than your left guitar. The compressor will act independent of the two channels, are just completely independent. If you load up a stereo compressor, for the most part, let's say your right channel, peaks and the compressor is engaged, it'll also affect your left channel. And I found that when I load up plugins in multi-mono, at least for stereo buses, I get just a general wider sound. That's why people like analog equipment. Analog equipment is non-linear, and all of these small non-linearities kind of like add up for a nice pleasing sound. That's why we like analog. Obviously, this is completely digital, but that's more of an analog, to me, it's more of an analog sounding approach than just loading up a stereo compressor. That's gonna kind of narrow your stereo field for the guitars, if that makes sense. So after that, I load up a second compressor. Again, that first compressor wasn't doing much, so keep that in mind. I'm not stacking 1,000 compressors doing a million things. These are very small miniature tweaks. I load up a C4. This is a standard metal thing, a lot of metal guys do this, to just control the palm mutes. Even though this isn't a metal track per se, there are some palm mutes happening, so some of the low end might get a little out of control. So I just had this in here just to keep those palm mutes in check. So I have the regular compressor there for flavor, and then I have the C4 there just to keep the palm mutes in check. Let's see how much gain reduction is existing in this, what is it? I have it set to about from 100 to 250. So from 100 hertz to 250 hertz, that range is being compressed if it gets out of control. It's probably doing very little, but let's see. Yeah, it's knocking down, a few dB just on the palm mutes. So let's say if there's a chorus where they're not palm muting and they're just strumming, going crazy, this will not be engaged at all. It's just barely controlling those lower mids. So that's it. Super simple. I like to approach mixing in a very simple manner. Again, not in the past, I used to do all kinds of stuff, load up crazy saturation plugins. I mean, you name it. I've combined, 4 different mics with a DI, with an amp sim, and I found throughout the years, the less really is more, in my opinion. So again, it's just, a left rhythm sound, right rhythm sound, going through a stereo bus. just a compressor on a stereo bus that's in multi-mono mode. And also, by the way, the C4 is also in multi-mono mode. And then my EQ, that's it. The reason why I don't EQ the individual guitars is because both guitar tracks were recorded through the exact same rig, and there's no reason to overcomplicate things. If it's a session that I'm mixing that I did not record and the two guitar tones are drastically different, then obviously I will EQ independently, but I try to keep things as simple as possible because there's no reason to make stuff complicated. So let's take a listen to the track again with all of that processing applied and see how it sounds. Let's check it out. So that's my approach to mixing rock guitars. Again, because of the drier tones, the less busyness, how the riffs are a little less busy or the metal in general, I get away with a little more flavor, a little more compression. And sometimes I get a little crazier with the rig. You know, I might use two mics. Metal, I try to keep it as straightforward as possible because I want that tone to be direct. I don't want to have any weird stuff happening with phase because the tone is, you know, for metal again, the tone is the foundation of your mix, one of the foundational elements, in my opinion. So I'm curious, what's your technique for mixing rock guitars? Does it differ from mixing metal guitars for you? Is it the same? Let me know. I would love to know. And also, if you'd like to download my free impulse response, the link is in the description. You can load it into your Guitar Sim plugin, and it should make dialing in a heavy, even a rock tone, a million times easier because it was captured through a Mesa cab that was properly mic'd with an SM57, which you can never go wrong with. And that is all. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, share, and until next time, happy mixing.